Welcome to Sounds Like Portraits. I'm Philippe Ungard. This is a conversation with creative humans. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. Sounds Like Portraits is also available on Frenchly.us. In this episode, you'll hear Natalie Rea talking about a fascinating story as a criminal defense lawyer. Generally speaking, criminal defense lawyers make sure that the state doesn't overstep its power in a justice system. In 1996, Natalie served as an observer to the Rwanda genocide trials. Only a handful of defense lawyers were there to represent more than 150,000 people. Her motto was, and still is, each defendant, even someone accused of genocide, needs criminal defense services. In 2001, she established the International Legal Foundation to address similar crises around the world. So this week, the question is, how to deal with injustice in a justice system. It's time to listen to her. And to start, she told me what she tried to do all her life.
All my life I've been worried that I would be incarcerated by mistake. Not all my life, as far as I remember. I've always had a thing about being stuck in a prison somewhere and nobody knows you're there, nobody's looking for you, and you're just there. I don't know where this comes from.
So what attracted you at first into the justice system?
Originally, I went to law school here in the U.S. to become a politician, and found out, kind of realized very early that that wasn't really a good thing for me.
Why?
I don't know if I realized politics wasn't good for me as much as in law school I got quite taken by criminal law, and that became my thing. It fits my view where I basically don't trust authority. It fits the kind of rebel in me, I think, from the very beginning.
In 1996, you served as an observer to the Rwanda genocide trials. What did you see?
How I ended up in Rwanda was just by accident. But I worked for the Legal Aid Society. I still work for the Legal Aid Society here in New York. And Human Rights Watch was looking for observers to the national genocide trials, right? There were always these trials in Arusha and these UN trials. So Human Rights Watch wanted people to go and just be observers. They wanted people who spoke French. I spoke French. The memo came on my desk, and that's where I went.
It was in 1996?
Yeah.
What did you see?
Well, when I arrived, they were supposed to start, I believe, in December of '96, but it was chaos. So nothing much happened. But what I did find was basically a handful of lawyers with Avocats Sans Frontières handling a handful of cases. There were, I think, 150,000 people in prison, but they were handling, let's say, 5-6 cases. So those were the only criminal defense lawyers. There were no Rwandan lawyers that were still in Rwanda willing to represent anybody accused of genocide. So, and I'm not questioning that. What I found was something that I thought was kind of very problematic, that there were no criminal defense lawyers, essentially. And because it's more of a civil law, European context and criminal justice system, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to New York and find U.S. lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, to volunteer to come and give what we do a lot in this country, which is pretrial representation to people incarcerated. So just to explain to them what their options were. So I came back and did exactly that. I found quite a few volunteers willing to we lived all together in one house. There were just 6 of us on rotation, and go into the prison and give people explanations of what they were facing.
Tell me, why is it so crucial to provide criminal defense, even for people who are accused of genocide?
Because there must be a fair process to decide who is guilty. I mean, I'm not God, and unless you do that, and unless you question the government, then anybody can be caught up in this, anybody. And I think that in Rwanda, I suspect there were quite a few people in prison that had nothing to do with the genocide, that may have been political prisoners at the time, and there needs to be a process.
More generally, why is it so complicated to represent oneself before the courts? Is the technical legal language a barrier for the common man, let's say, the common man?
Well, I think it's more complicated than that. In any time when you have the power of the state versus the individual is in a bad position. So that person should get help, professional help. This goes back to the Egypt and the pharaohs. When people weren't educated, you had somebody else help you out. So yes, the system is complicated, and yes, systems are in place to make it fair so that the government can't invent evidence presented against you. So it's trying to set a balance between the state and the individual, which is a very difficult thing to do.
How were you considered by the other lawyers at the time in Rwanda?
There was a big, big international community. Some people called us the dirty bunch. We were not popular, there's no question about it. There was an entire industry, if you can call it that, that had to do with the genocide, right? From providing assistance to the victims and their children, I mean, as it should be. So we were not very popular.
Tell me more, because they should have known the reason why you were there.
Well, yes. First of all, it's a long time ago. 1996 is a long time ago, and there's been huge, huge progress in kind of the attitude towards defense in general. You know, after Rwanda, there were terrible issues in Bosnia and in the Balkans. So I think that the problem is that nobody sees this as a priority, and I don't blame them either. You know, kids need blankets and vaccinations and food and schools, and so I can understand that people don't think what are we doing here? But I think that I think it's a mistake. I think, you know, if you're going to rebuild a country and rebuild institutions, this has to be from the get-go. Because of the potential abuse of authority. And there's abuse of authority in Rwanda today as there was then.
What is your strongest memory of your arrival in Rwanda?
I had been in touch here in New York with a very famous expert on Rwanda called Alison Deforge, who unfortunately died in a plane accident, but she was definitely the Rwandan expert in the world. And she was with Human Rights Watch, and she had put me in touch, given me the name of a human rights activist, Rwandan Hutu, human rights activist, who was in prison, in Kigali Central Prison. And she said, Natalie, just go and tell him that we're friends, and he will make sure that your program works and people trust you. And because why would they trust me? I mean, you know, I'm a rather short French woman. So I'll never forget, I got access to the prison. They were 1,500 men, all in pink prison garb. They were pink. And, you know, who all looked at me like, what is this person doing here? I mean, it was so obvious that I looked like I had come from Mars or something. I had the name of the guy. They bring me down back to his office because he was clearly somebody who gave advice to everybody, I think, on all matters. And I show up, and I said, Alison had sent me. And I explained to him what I wanted to do. He says to one of his assistants, he said, okay, go and get the table set up in the spot where they gathered in the prison, which is not a prison like here, right? It's completely open. And not the door isn't open, but inside is just a community, right? So then he comes out with me, and he literally picks me up and puts me on the table like I don't know, like a box or something. And I'm standing on this table, and with all these guys in pink in front of me. And he says, this is Natalie Rea, listen to her, she's here to help. And it was just the most surreal experience of my life. I mean, that was it.
And what happened from that?
From then on, it was kind of self-organized within the prison, where the head of the head prisoner who ran the prison would get people to sign up to come and talk to us. And we had 4 offices in the prison, and people came to talk to us. I suspect people were probably paying somebody so that they had the opportunity to speak to us. And the reality is everybody we talked to had seen no one except ICR, the Red Cross, in 4 years.
What is the first challenge in representing people from a different culture? What was the most challenging aspect for you?
You would be surprised at the similarities between criminal defendants around the world. There's a bit of, you don't really want to believe what's happening to you. There's a bit of denial. Yes, the culture is different outside, but at the heart of it, I come in, whether I'm in a prison in Rwanda or elsewhere, I come in with a completely different culture than my client in the first place. I represent people, as a legal aid lawyer, and basically I'm here to help, and either you have something in you where your clients trust that, oh yeah, maybe you can help me, and I think that that's all that counts, is to get across this sense to whomever it may be that you're here to help.
But how did you approach the local realities and local habits?
I had to deal with the Minister of Justice. Was very interesting because...
Can you take some example?
Well, I can't talk about specific clients, but you just listen to their stories. I mean, our goal was fairly simple. What we started by doing is basically saying, like, what evidence do they have against you? And the reality was there was such lack of systems in place that of the 300 people we represented at the time, I think the government knew of the existence, let alone of their presence in prison for 4 years, of about 25 or something. In other words, we were more informational, but that aspect of the law had not been understood by the authorities. When I talked to the Minister of Justice, I said, well, we're going to want to ask what evidence you have. And he said to me, they know what they've done. I said, this is not confession. This is a criminal justice system. And, a lot of people, there was nothing against them.
Without naming anyone, could you tell me a story about someone you have represented at the time?
I can tell you one story that was kind of one of the weirdest stories. So there were 4 of us at the time. We had, in all, 12 of us went to Rwanda. But since I was the leader of this team, so one guy comes into me, to my interview room, and says to me, Natalie, could I interrupt you a second? I said, no, actually, I'm talking to a client right now. He said, I really think I should talk to you now. I said, what do you mean you really think I should? Trust me, Natalie, I think I should talk to you now. So I go out into the yard or whatever it was. He said, Natalie, this guy I just talked to told me that there's going to be a prison uprising tomorrow, and we shouldn't come to the prison. Okay. What am I going to do? And it was all a question of, I went back to my office to see if we represented the person he had accused, which we did not. And then, I actually did report if something was going to happen to the minister. And he, like me, I said, I would like to talk to you. He said, I'm having lunch with my daughter. And I said, I think I should join you for lunch with your daughter. He said, no. I said, no, I'm coming right now. And I told him. But that was kind of a special event.
Emotionally, how did you cope with the emotional level when you have to deal with these kind of people accused of horrible things?
I think coping with living in Rwanda in 1986 after the genocide, aside from the work I was doing, which I was just doing in a professional way, and is a very obviously life-changing experience on, how would we have behaved during the genocide? I mean, I think a lot of stories have come out on how certain people hid their friends because they knew them in their houses, and then they kind of accused others so that they could save their friends. And These others probably were killed. You know, it's traumatic for, you just wonder what person you would be. And I can't say that I know who I would be, but I certainly have more questions on who I am than I did before I went to Rwanda.
What comes to mind right now is that at the core of your experience, it's not so easy to separate victims and offenders.
Generally speaking, I would think that criminal defense lawyers are people who are fighting the state. And we all, of course, think about victims, but in the scheme of things, there are people representing the victims, and that's not us. We're making sure that the state doesn't overstep its power. So it's not, I'm not saying we don't think of victims, that's just, but there's plenty of unfairness when you're poor in any justice system in the world that I've worked in, where one could certainly say that our clients are also victims. And they're not seen that way, but I think that they are in many ways.
Is there a memory that comes to mind right now about Rwanda?
You know, we had interpreters, for example, who were interpreting because most of the lawyers were American. And, you know, these were kids. They were, my interpreter who worked with me primarily was 20 or something. I mean, this is a boy who had seen his entire family literally slaughtered. And he was sitting in a room with me, and he was translating what these guys who had, some of them had probably done what had been done to his parents. And I can't still to this day really wrap my mind around that. I just can't. I mean, I just can't imagine. And I also remember a conversation with the Attorney General when I was asking for information about certain, and he stopped me and he said, I just want you to realize that there were rivers of blood down the street. These are difficult just visions to have.
In 2001, you established the International Legal Foundation. What was it about? What was the purpose?
So that flowed from our project in Rwanda. Rwanda, we were called Legal Aid Rwanda because I work for the Legal Aid Society in New York, and I seem to have absolutely no imagination. There were very interesting legal problems from an institutional perspective in Rwanda. In other words, everybody, the international community came in, experts came in, they wrote laws on the genocide that I felt, certainly from a defense perspective, that were completely separate from the culture of Rwanda. And sometimes I felt if any of these people who had written the laws and worked on all this had just had a coffee or a beer in a cafe in Rwanda, they would have known that, for example, a plea bargaining provision was something that was culturally not acceptable. Because in Rwanda, if you deny something on Monday, I wasn't involved in the genocide, you can't change that on Friday or 10 years later. It's just not, because you couldn't go back into your community. So I thought that the idea of this building of a system with no understanding of the local culture was a mistake. And when I came back from Rwanda, I was asked by the UN to go and work in East Timor. I didn't know East Timor, and I thought this just illustrates what's wrong with kind of this the international rule of law. And so we decided to try and work with a legal community in exile to keep them abreast of all, you know, kind of legal development on the international level. And with my colleagues, we picked the Afghan community in exile in Peshawar. And it was interesting. We had lectures in Peshawar. I had some of my colleagues from Legal Aid Rwanda had come and given lectures on things to professors and former professors. And this was in end of 1999. Then we gave a class in 2000. And one seminar was scheduled for October 2001. Well, you can imagine that on 9/11, that schedule was kind of changed. But the result of that was that the people we had worked with came to us and said, you know, can you help us now that we're all going back to Afghanistan? And the only thing we could help with or we felt that we had an expertise in, was in helping them set up a legal aid system and to provide criminal defense services. But that really meant teaching and developing a criminal defense culture in Afghanistan, which just didn't exist. I mean, lawyers never met their clients, and lawyers never went to court. They just wrote letters. So it was really from the bottom up. But if you go today, there's some very, very good criminal defense lawyers in Afghanistan.
Personally, did you learn something essential from these years, from all that?
You know, the person I am today is obviously a very different person than if I hadn't had these experiences. I don't know what I would be like if I hadn't been. I just think, you know, what I've learned is basically, you know, before that and before Legal Aid Rwanda, there was no sense really that a lawyer had an exportable skill. Like doctors did, right? There was always Médecins Sans Frontières. You know, you can do an appendectomy here, it's the same everywhere. And that's okay. But for some reason, lawyers, the vision is that law is such a local thing. It's so different everywhere, you can't export it. But that's wrong. We American lawyers, and I think, lawyers all over, but I think especially lawyers who have been trained in an Anglo-common law system, we have a skill that is exportable in training people, in getting people to understand what their law says. So what I've learned is that basically criminal law is not that complicated. It's not nuclear science. You need a penal code, you need a constitution, and a criminal procedure code. Once you read those three documents, wherever they are, you can figure out how to represent somebody and how to do it well in a culture where generally they no longer, because of conflict or something, they no longer do it properly.
That's the last stage of the interview. I'm gonna leave the place. Please hold the microphone and add whatever you want to the interview.
Not quite prepared for this. But I hope that a conversation with a criminal defense lawyer or legal aid lawyer maybe help people understand what we do, why it's important, and yes, how important it is for everyone. We could all be one person stuck in a system somewhere, and we would love to see somebody, a lawyer, show up and get us out of, you know, the predicament we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, for sharing your story. It was Sounds Like Portraits, a podcast by Philippe Ungar. Please visit soundslikeportraits.com and don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcast. Music Charmeuse de Serpent, composed and conducted by Olivier Glisson. See you soon for the next episode.